Okay, we're going to talk about question 2. In this question, we are going to talk about a few security principles that we go over in this class. There's 11 of them. I'm not going to go over them individually right now. I'm going to go over them as they come up. And our task here is to essentially match these scenarios to whichever principles apply. So let's start with the first scenario. It's that new cars often come with a valet key, which is intended to be used by valet drivers who park your car for you. So the key opens the door and it turns on the ignition, which are things that the valet driver needs to do, but it doesn't open the trunk or the glove compartment. In this case, we're restricting the privilege of the valet driver to be exactly the privileges that they need, as opposed to unnecessary ones like opening the trunk. And this is an example of least privilege because least privilege involves minimizing how much privilege you give each program, in this case, the valet driver and component. In practice, a particular implementation of this could be that you grant specific roles to different users, and then each role is associated with a set of privileges. So you don't give like your interns like super admin access, for instance. Maybe you create a new intern role, or maybe you create privileges to access to write to the database, to maybe make calls to certain admin functions, but not all of them, and so on. Okay, the second one is many homeowners leave a house key under the floor mat in front of their door. So if the attacker knew where the key was, then it's very easy to break into your house. And I would say the system is not particularly secure. And this is related to a security principle known as consider Shannon's maxim, which says don't rely on security through obscurity. So obscurity here just means that you're sort of hiding the implementation of your software, or in our case, we're hiding the location of the key. But if someone knew where we put the key, then they'd be able to break in. And Shannon's maxim is that assume the enemy knows the system. So the enemy, like your system should be resilient even if the enemy knows what your implementation is. And this is a very common like idea in like when you write like open source crypto libraries, for instance. The libraries are secure because they are written in a way that isn't breakable even if you know the implementation. And further, they're secure because the implementations are like subject to scrutiny by the open source community, and they can like find bugs and stuff. So this is consider Shannon's maxim. Okay, the third one, it's not worth it to use a $400,000 bike lock to protect a $100 bike. The reason why it's not worth it is because, well, if the bike gets stolen, it makes more sense to just pay $100 to buy a new bike. And that would last you 4,000 bikes if you were to like extend that to the cost of the lock. So in this case, it makes sense to just not use this very expensive lock. And this is security as economics, which says security is a cost-benefit analysis. Adding security usually costs more money, and you have to figure out whether it's worth it. The next one is warranties on cell phones don't cover accidental damage, which includes liquid damage. But unfortunately, many customers who accidentally damage their phones with liquid are going to wait for it to dry and then take it to the store, claiming that it broke by itself. So they're not going to reveal the fact that they spilled water on it. To combat this, many companies have begun to include on the product a small sticker that turns red and stays red when it gets wet. So in this case, we're not preventing the user from getting the phone wet, but we are able to detect that they did do so. And detecting that means we can still like void the warranty in this case. So this is an example of detect if you can't prevent. Another relevant thing to consider here is that when designing the warranty, you might not initially think about like the fact that humans might lie about violating the warranty. But this is a thing that people do. And this is an example of consider human factors, where we have to think about the fact that ordinary people are going to be using our systems, and we have to think about how they will use them. Social security numbers were not originally designed as a secret identifier. Nowadays, they are often easily obtainable or guessable. So this is pointing out that because we didn't initially design social security numbers to be secret identifiers, it's a lot harder to add in this authentication method after the fact. And that's often the case, and it's an example of, I'm looking for the principle, design insecurity from the start. So it's often hard to retrofit security after you've already designed your system. So this is really something you should be thinking about from the ground up. Even if you use a password on your laptop lock screen, there's software which lets a skilled attacker with specialized equipment bypass it. So one thing I notice here is that the attacker needs to be skilled. So any random attacker won't usually be able to access your laptop. And so deciding whether to deal with this, whether to maybe buy a different laptop, has to do with knowing your threat model. So figuring out who your attacker is, what resources they have, because you don't necessarily need to defend against things that your vulnerabilities that your attacker won't be able to use. Okay, next one is that there's a secret sharing scheme which allows us to split a secret between multiple people so that all of them have to collaborate in order to recover the secret. So what I'm noticing here is that there's no central party which holds the secret, and this looks like no one person or program has complete power. So we've split up the privilege, and they have to come together in order to do something. So this is separation of responsibility. DRM encryption is often effective until someone can reverse engineer the decryption algorithm. So reverse engineering the decryption algorithm is essentially like figuring out what the implementation or the code for the algorithm is. If reverse engineering it gives it away, that means that the system is no longer secure if the attacker knows the implementation. And this is the same situation as the key, where if you know where the house key is, then you're able to get in. If you know what the code for the encryption is, you're able to break it. So this is consider Shannon's maxim. In other words, don't rely on security through obscurity. Okay, banks often make you answer security questions over the phone, and generally answers to these are low entropy, which means they're easy to guess. However, some security-conscious people use a random password as the answer to a security question, which are high entropy. Attackers can sometimes convince the phone representative by claiming, I just put in some nonsense for that question, because a random string often looks like nonsense. This is an example of consider human factors. Specifically, this is social engineering, where we're trying to convince the phone rep that we're not malicious, and they might actually believe us because they are not a computer, and they have some sort of like priors on like whether they should trust us. In this case, they would be wrong to trust us. Oftentimes at bars, an employee will wait outside the only entrance to the bar, enforcing that people who want to enter form a single file line. Then the employee checks each individual's ID to verify if they are 21. So what I notice here is that in order to get into the bar, everyone has to go through the same entrance. There's no way to get around it. And this is like sort of the only entrance. And so this is an example of ensure complete mediation, where we're making sure to check every access to every object. In this case, the object is sort of the bar, and the access point is the door. And we are checking that door, and there's no like back door or anything. So ensure complete mediation. Tesla vehicles often come equipped with Sentry mode, and this is going to record footage of any break-ins to the vehicle and alert the vehicle owner of the incident. In this case, your car still got broken into, but you detected it, right? The owner now knows that the car was broken into. This is another example of detect if you can't prevent. Finally, when a traffic light detects that it may be giving conflicting signals, it enters a state of error and displays a flashing red light in all directions. And so the flashing red light in all directions, this means if you pass your driving test, that you should treat the intersection as a stop sign. And this is an example of a default, where like if the system breaks, you still have a default which sort of works, right? Like people can still drive without crashing, like on a four-way stop sign. It just might not be as efficient as an actual intersection. And so this is one example of use fail-safe defaults, which is if the mechanism fails or crashes, it should still default to secure behavior. I think it's also an example of detect if you can't prevent, because we have this error. We didn't prevent it because there were conflicting signals, but we did detect it and we displayed that we detected it. All right, I think that's it. Bye.